rolling low across the blackened earth, where once there had been homes, barns, and the laughter of children. Now there was only silence broken by the creak of collapsing beams. A lone rider emerged from the haze, his silhouette carved against the dying sun. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but the weariness etched into his face told a story longer than any trail. This was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, yet still carried on. His name wasn't known to many, and to most it didn't matter. To him the road ahead was just dust and duty. He slowed his horse when he saw movement in the ruins. Two figures crouched by the remains of a chimney, their shoulders trembling, their hands pressed against their faces. Women draped in soot-stained shawls, their hair tangled with ash. Their sobs carried on the wind, sharper than the crackle of any flame. The cowboy dismounted, his boots crunching over the brittle debris, and for a moment he simply watched. Grief had a language of its own, and he did not wish to interrupt its prayer. But then he saw their fire had long gone cold, just charred sticks lying lifeless among the stones. The night air was dropping fast, and without warmth, despair would cut deeper. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. Even in ashes a fire can rise again. The women startled, lifting their tear-streaked faces. Fear flickered in their eyes, for a stranger in the wasteland could be salvation or death. Yet the cowboy's gaze carried no threat, only a quiet promise. Without asking permission, he crouched before their broken fire pit, gathered splinters from fallen beams, and struck flint against steel. Sparks kissed the wood, smoke curled, and soon flames licked upward, painting their faces in gold. The women's tears shimmered in the light, not erased, but warmed by the rebirth of fire. The cowboy sat back on his heels, tipping his hat slightly. "Cry if you must," he said softly, "but don't freeze while you do." The women stared at him, lost between sorrow and gratitude. One whispered, "Everything we had is gone." The cowboy's eyes drifted over the ruins, then back to the fire. Maybe so. But while you're breathing, not everything is lost. And so, as the darkness spread over the desolate land, three souls huddled around a newborn flame, bound not by blood but by survival. None of them yet knew where the road would lead, but for this night the fire was enough. Not yet. The words settled over them like another blanket against the cold. For the first time since the fire began, the older woman allowed herself a breath that was not entirely filled with sorrow. The cowboy turned to them again. "I can't promise much, but I can promise this. As long as this fire burns, you're not alone." And with that, he began gathering what little remained unburned in the ruins, shards of timber, scraps of cloth, pieces of metal. To the women it seemed madness at first, but as the day wore on, they realized what he was doing. He was not scavenging for wealth, but for life. He built them a makeshift shelter against the wind, stacked stones to form a barrier, and set aside enough wood to keep the fire alive through another night. Every act was simple, yet every act was a declaration. Ashes could be defied. By evening, when the sun once again bled into the horizon, the women sat within the small refuge he had crafted. It was not a home, not yet, but it was something, and for souls who had believed themselves lost, something was enough. The cowboy sat down across the fire, his face caught between flame and shadow. "Tomorrow," he said, "we talk about where to go next. Tonight, we rest." The women nodded, and for the first time since the raid, they ate, drank from the stream nearby, and let the warmth of fire be more than just survival. It was hope, fragile but growing, and as the night deepened, they watched the cowboy with quiet wonder. A stranger had found them in ashes, and in his silence, his strength, he had given them something greater than fire. He had given them reason to believe again. The third dawn broke over the wasteland with a cold, brittle light. The embers of the fire glowed faintly, their smoke rising like fragile prayers into the pale sky. The cowboy stirred first, his instincts sharp as ever, though his body ached from another sleepless night. He rose slowly, scanning the horizon where the land stretched out in bleak silence, scarred by fire and ruin. The two women still slept, wrapped in their cloaks against the morning chill. He watched them for a moment, not out of sentiment, but with the recognition that they carried within them the quiet strength of survival. They had endured devastation, grief, and fear, yet they had not surrendered completely. The fire he had built was no longer just wood and flame. It was a symbol that still warmed their hearts. When the older woman awoke, she looked to him with eyes no longer hollow, but steady, if weary. "You stayed again," she said softly. The cowboy nodded. The fire needed tending. She studied him for a long moment. And what of your own road? Don't you have somewhere to ride? His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the faint outline of mountains loomed in the distance. Every man's road is long. Sometimes it bends where you don't expect. Right now, mine runs alongside yours. The younger woman stirred, sitting up and brushing ash from her skirt. Her voice was tentative, but it carried a trace of hope. You mean, you'll help us find somewhere new? The cowboy tipped his hat. That's the plan. They spent the day gathering what they could from the ruins. Bits of food charred but edible. Tools half broken but still useful. Blankets singed but serviceable. Every fragment mattered. The women moved with new purpose now. Their grief still heavy but not as paralyzing. The cowboy guided them, showing how to bundle supplies, how to choose wood for carrying fire, how to walk with their heads up instead of bent in despair. By evening, they stood at the edge of the settlement. Behind them lay ashes, silence, and sorrow. Before them stretched a land uncertain, vast, and unkind. The women hesitated, but the cowboy struck a match and lit a torch from the last of their fire. He handed it to them. Carry it, he said, not because the flames will last forever, but because the light reminds you that you can always make more. The older woman held the torch, her fingers trembling, but she nodded with quiet determination. The younger one looked at the cowboy and whispered, We would have died without you. His reply was low, almost lost in the wind. Maybe, or maybe you would have found the strength yourselves. Either way, you're not alone now. And so the three of them walked away from the ruins, the firelight casting long shadows behind them. Ahead lay trials unknown, bandits, hunger, storms, and choices that would shape the rest of their lives. But for the first time since the world had burned around them, they walked not into despair, but into the possibility of tomorrow. That night, when they camped beneath the stars, the cowboy took first watch, as always. The women slept near the fire, their breath steady, their faces calmer than before. He looked at them, then at the fire, and finally at the endless road stretching into darkness. He knew this was only the beginning. The ashes were behind them. The fire was alive. But the true test lay ahead. The road stretched wide and endless beneath the morning sun. A ribbon of dust, cutting through plains where silence weighed, heavier than the sky itself. The cowboy led the way, his horse walking slow beside the two women. Their steps were uneven, weary from grief and travel. But there was strength in their stride now, born of necessity. Behind them, the torch they once carried had burned to nothing. But in their hearts the fire lived on. The younger woman hummed under her breath, the faintest thread of a melody, as though testing whether her voice still remembered song. The older one carried bundles of salvaged supplies, her jaw set with quiet resolve. Neither spoke of what they had lost, but the cowboy knew grief had not vanished. It lingered like smoke after flame, present in every glance backward, in every silence between words. At midday they came upon the carcass of a wagon, shattered wheels half buried in the sand. The cowboy raised his hand for the women to stop. He crouched low, eyes scanning the ground, tracks, fresh enough to trouble him. Bootprints more than half a dozen leading east. Bandits, maybe the same who had brought ruin to the women's home. His jaw tightened. He said nothing at first, only checked the cylinder of his revolver, the glint of steel catching the sun. The women saw the change in his face. Is it them? The older asked, her voice trembling. Maybe, he answered. Maybe not. Either way, we keep moving. Caution now is better than sorrow later. They pressed on, but unease traveled with them. Every rustle of wind in the grass seemed like a whisper, every shadow a threat waiting to take form. The cowboy stayed near, his presence steady as stone. He had seen enough roads to know that danger was never far. By nightfall, they made camp near a stream that trickled faintly through the earth. The cowboy gathered wood, built another fire, and the women prepared what little food they had. The flames rose, painting the night with warmth, and for a time the weight of fear lifted. The younger woman asked him for a story, any story, even a simple one. The cowboy leaned back, his eyes reflecting firelight. He did not often tell tales, for his life was written in scars and silence. But something in their faces, so desperate for more than sorrow, loosened his tongue. There was once a boy, he began slowly, who thought the world was nothing but dust and cruelty. He lost everything, home, family, dreams. But one night a stranger lit a fire for him, gave him a piece of bread, and told him the world wasn't all ashes. That boy carried the fire in his heart from then on, even when he had nothing else. He grew up, wandered far, but he never forgot that night. Sometimes, a single act of kindness is enough to keep a soul walking when it wants to fall. The women listened in silence, their eyes glistening in the glow. They knew the story was his own, though he did not speak his name. And they understood, perhaps for the first